Hi everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from whatever part of the world you're watching this. I'd like to welcome all of you to this special seminar that we're doing today on CSER. Thank you, Dr. Nandini, for accepting the kind invite
Thank you.
and
My
sparing your
pleasure.
time to talk with. Thank you. I'd like to introduce what we're trying to do today. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Dr. Manan and I'm a consultant psychiatrist based in London. Uh, like everyone else who's attending this, I was a CSER aspirant when I came into this country. I did my MRC Psych while I was doing my training in India. Then I moved here in 2021, April. I submitted my CSER portfolio in about 14 months, June 2022. And then, of course, the GMC will give you suggestions and we'll talk everything about what a usual process is like. I think is sometimes made out to be a bit more difficult than what it actually is. I think one thing that Dr. Nandini and I both share is we opted for CSER. We chose CSER rather than, I think, I've known her story a little bit as well, and I'll ask you, Dr. Nandini, about your story.
Sure.
But I think we both chose CSER, whereas we did have the option of going into CCT. And hence, I think sometimes CSER is being looked into as, it's something even slightly different from CCT, which I think is a choice to make based on what your life position is, what you want out of your job and stuff like that. So thank you so much for accepting the invite. And I'd love for you to share your CSER journey to get us started. And then, of course,
So it's always a pleasure reminiscing when you've been through a steep uphill curve and to be on the summit and look back. I suppose I choose that analogy because I love hiking. But going back to the journey. So I came to this country in 2003 as an SHO in Scotland, finished my membership exams in 2006 autumn. Before coming to this country, I had an MD and a DNB in psychiatry from India. And when I first came to the UK, there was always a route to get into the specialist register, which did not depend on training. And at that point, up till 2006, 2007, that non training route was left with the individual royal colleges. It's a very, very long history, and that bit of history has probably been lost to public memory. But people who are old enough, like myself, will remember that there was something called Article 9 in the Royal College of Psychiatrists. And going back, if you think about the people who came on international fellowships, we still have consultant colleagues working in the NHS who have neither CSER nor CCT, but they directly were put on the specialist register on the basis of their Indian training and experience. And that was done by Article 9 of the college. And Article 9 of the college basically said if you have done 5 years of training in psychiatry, anywhere in the world, we look at your curriculum syllabus, and if we think it's acceptable, we will recommend you to GMC to go on the specialist register. So that was the legislation by which many people got on the specialist register. Now, another bit of background to remember to put into context is that there are these organizations, the General Medical Council, the Royal Colleges, and there is legislation that binds them. So when there are these major changes of how do you put people on the GMC register, how do you put people on the specialist register, that is actually an act of law, that is legislation taking place. And then how to interpret the legislation, how to implement the registration legislation, that's what the Royal Colleges and the GMC do. Registration is a duty of the GMC, is ownership of the GMC. The Royal Colleges are always advisors. So when you look at the law, it is GMC putting somebody on the register or the specialist register. The Royal College recommends people, whether it's for CCT or CSER, actually. So going back to 2006, when all the colleges were doing their own thing, there was something called the ODTS, if people remember. So that would help people bypass PLAB but not get specialist registration. So all the colleges were basically doing their own thing about how to support trainees from overseas. And then in 2006 was the first major legislative change, and there was an organization that came into being called PMEDB. And what PMEDB did was it took over specialist registration across the board. So all the Royal Colleges now could not do their own thing. All specialist registration curves, CCT or CESR, went through PMEDB. And it was for the
Right.
first time that Article 14, CESR was then called Article 14, came into being. And the reason why it came into being was we had lots of experienced specialty doctors in the terminology during those days. And if they didn't pass college exams, they couldn't get into higher training, and there was no route to specialist registration for them. So, whilst there was a known training route to specialist registration for doctors coming from overseas, so people who had done specialty training overseas, had been consultant overseas, there was this demand on the ground. So, you're bringing overseas doctors as consultants. What about the experienced body we have over here? And PMED-B and Article 14 was the first time when the route was opened up to specialty doctors to go on the specialist register. I was then just finishing my MRC Psych, and when this new legislation came in, it was the first time I started thinking, well, I've got my MD behind me, and I have grounding in the workings of this country in my 3 years of an SHO job, where I was very lucky to get very supportive consultants who gave me more responsibilities than they would usually give a first year, second year, third year SHO. I was treated like a registrar almost. And so when this new legislation came, I thought, why not go through Article 14 rather than go through higher training? I did my first application then. I was not successful in 2006, but they gave me a very concise, succinct, smart list of things to do by which I could reapply. I didn't have to put in the full portfolio, but basically a review application. And in those days, they gave me up till 3 years to reapply. So I got into higher training. I got an ST4 post in general adult psychiatry. And I was towards the end of ST4 when I put in my CSER application. By then, it had become CSER. And 2009, beginning of 2009, I put in the application. By the end of 2009, I got my specialist registration, and I became a consultant within a week because I had applied for a consultant job. I had done the interview. I had that 6-month deadline to join. So my CSER application, came in the right time, and I joined as a consultant. It cut out 14 months of training for me. So if I had stuck on for another 14 months, I would have hopefully got a CCT. And people look back, and at that point, CSER was even less understood than it is now. And there were lots of queries about, you just have to do another year and a bit. Why are you doing this to yourself? What's the rush? And I suppose there was a bit of ego. I didn't need to do 3 years. I must reflect on that myself. But things have turned out by luck. It wasn't all by planning, but the consultant job came at the right time. And then a lot of things have come just at the right time of my career. And every time I had thought, if I hadn't done my CSER, I would have been 14 months behind. And so that's how things worked out for me.
I
Yeah.
think that's fascinating. I'd like to share a little bit about, because I connected a lot to a couple of things that you said, that I need to be humble enough to accept that, there was a little bit of ego involved. And I think that was a little bit of my journey as well. I'd done my MD from Gujarat University, which is like one of the nicer universities in India. And I was like, I've done my MD, I've done my MRC Psych. Why do I need to do 3 more years of training? Why do I need to move 3 different towns and do 3 different types of training? So back in the day when I moved countries, I had no idea as to, how to prepare a CSER portfolio. I knew that between CCT and CSER, CSER seems to be the one that I want to choose, because I don't want to do 3 different years in 3 different. You know how training is in India. With all due respect to how it is, it's a little, human rights is not the priority in India as far as training is concerned.
Intense.
And hence the idea of training for 3 more years didn't sound like the first thing that you wanted to do when you moved to a country for freedom and happiness and stuff like that. So I thought that out of the two, I definitely don't want to train again. In fact, one of the main reasons why I chose UK was because, the idea of CSER and the flexibility of building your career up, building your portfolio up at your own pace, going around and getting those bits of experience, that sounded fascinating. Weirdly enough, to me, CCT, with all due respect, of course, to CCT, sounds much more structured, whereas CSER sounds much more artistic, where you can, paint your own brushes and bring your own colors and make that painting by yourself. And I think that is why Caesar has been made to, it is designed to be abstract rather than concrete, so that people from all different backgrounds, all different countries are able to create a portfolio and have a fair chance at getting into the specialist register, which I think is a beautiful caveat for me to add, that you were till very recently, the Associate Dean for Equivalence, which is CSER, for the Royal College. I'd love for you to share your journey as to how that happened, going from someone who's aspiring to do CSER to becoming the Associate Dean of CSER for the Royal College. How did that work out?
And being a CSER evaluator was always something in my mind. And because I've been through the CSER journey, and because it was so little understood, and people will automatically become clinical and educational supervisors. People automatically will think about becoming CASC examiners. That seems to be the usual pathway once you've become a consultant. But CSER evaluator wasn't something that people usually think about. But having been through a CSER journey, I've always kept a lookout on the Royal College about when is the time that I can become a CSER evaluator. And you could do that after being in post for 1 year. So I looked out for the right induction date, and it was in 2012 ultimately that I became a CSER evaluator, and Professor Helen Bruce was the Associate Dean for Equivalence at that point. And one of the models as far as how the CSER pathway has gone and been led, she's absolutely my model and inspiration over there. I learned a lot from her. So 2012, I joined the equivalence committee. I started, doing CSER evaluations, got addicted to them. Doing CSER evaluations is a bit like Marmite. You either love it or hate it. So we've got consultant colleagues, both with CSER and CCT backgrounds, who get into the equivalence committee and are absolutely committed. They can't do without doing a CSER evaluation. They do one and immediately ask for another. And there are others who do one or just come for the training and say, I can't do this. And so I did that for 4 years. And in 2016, Professor Bruce was coming to the end of her tenure, and she also got drawn into another role. She became the associate dean for recruitment, which is a strategic role in the college to look into recruitment into psychiatric training. And as she was moving into that post, her post was advertised. And she did talk to me about it, to say that, Nandini, I think, you would be one of the people I would be happy to pass on the role to. There were others as well. She spoke to a number of people, not just me. So I went for the role and I got it. It was a heady feeling, I must say. 2016 meant that I had been a consultant for some 6, 7 years, quite early in my career. So to be an associate dean in the college seemed, quite surreal. But CSER was something that I was really, really comfortable with. So I started, supervising evaluations for those 5 years, 2016 to 2021. I didn't do active evaluations because I had to supervise, and if there was a discrepancy between two evaluators, then I had to take the casting vote. I worked a lot with GMC in brushing up specialty specific guidelines, and then the new curriculum came through. or the work started. And whilst I was associate dean and I was part of the curriculum committee, that was a very rewarding piece of work, and inputted into the new curriculum. I think we'll talk about that in a bit more of detail, because that has been a big change in the last couple of years. Worked on the new SSGs, which have been since brushed up with the new legislation that has come in. Um, and then finally finished in 2021 with my name on the new curriculum as one of the people who had contributed, and a document which was the guidance for trusts wanting to support people on the CSER pathway. So that document is also one of the things I'm really happy and found really rewarding. It wasn't there before, so a very useful document. I had set up CSER training within the college, have trained throughout the country with numerous trusts, and I hope have been able to change the image of CSER itself throughout the country in many ways. And then in 2021, I shifted over to National Lead for Recruitment, which is a post with what was then Health Education England and is now NHS England Workforce Training and Education. So I chaired that committee within I still call it Health Education England, which looks into the recruitment into co-training and higher training in the country. So it seems like I've changed camps, but
That's
not quite. It's still another route into specialist registration. And I feel very, very fortunate that, having the scope to lead the two main pathways leading to specialist registration nationally. It's not an opportunity that comes across in every career. So I'm
yeah.
very happy about that. I've gone from one to the other.
It's really interesting the shift you've had, and I'd love to dwell deep into that as well. To start off, I'd love to know as to when you took over as the Associate Dean of Equivalence, what was CSER like at that point, and what changes happened during your tenure, which you feel might be important not only from for us as geeks to talk about CSER, because I am someone who loves to know where it came from and what the journey is, but I think it would be really wise for even people who are aspirants to get to know, because I think all of this, the whole journey, tells someone who's an aspirant as to what an evaluator is looking for, what the process is designed to seek, what is the reading between the lines and trying to understand as to what are the things that you want to evidence. And hence, when you took over as the associate dean, what was CSER and a portfolio looking like, and through your tenure by the time, how did it change?
I think the expectations from the portfolio have not majorly changed at the time when I joined the equivalence committee, became associate dean, and even now as we are catching up with the backlog of applications still by the old curriculum. That structure didn't majorly change. But what I did notice was a huge change on the ground in the quality of applications that we were getting. And that has been really rewarding to see. When I started off in the equivalence committee, a lot of applications would be about giving testimonials, lots of elaborate CVs, lots of certificates of every training that people have done, from hand washing to infection control to every half an hour online, whatever. People were trying to just bulk up and voluminize their portfolios without having a clear idea of what we were looking for. And the big change was, setting up the training. When I first joined, there was this debate about the college. Could they do the training because they were the evaluators? Was there a conflict of interest over there? But then we found out that there were other companies who were charging exorbitant amounts and doing that training anyways, and people were attending those trainings, getting confused, and it wasn't fair on them. And so we said that, look, if we can do training for for trainees about how to do their e-portfolio, if we can do training for trainees about aspects of training and how to do the right thing, why can't we do the same for CSER applicants? It almost seems unfair for them. And it's not like we are saying if you attend the training, we are going to pass you. We are telling you to do the right thing, and doing the right thing is still your responsibility. We can tell you to give 30 cases of of on various settings and various diagnoses, but the quality of those cases, that is still your responsibility. Just putting in 30 cases is not going to be enough. You should know that by common sense. We are looking for consultant level write ups over here. So I think the main change during my time was more transparency, openness, training, dialogue with CSER applicants, and also with lots of medical directors, clinical directors, managers, TPDs, with putting out this message of flexibility, that we can't be fixed about everybody has to do 3 years of co-training and everybody has to do 3 years of higher training. Look at people's individual circumstances, understand what is about CSER and what is about CCT, and do a tailor-made journey for somebody. So that was the change in terms of the CSER evaluation template. Now, there are appendices in my book. It's there on the picture that we've put on over there. But in the appendices, right at the end, there are anonymized templates about, how a CSER application is evaluated, what we write up about. And that write up hasn't changed as yet. I'm still getting write ups according to the old curricular 19 intended learning outcomes. But from the 30th of November, everybody has now got to put their applications by higher learning outcomes, which fits in with the new curriculum and fits in with the new legislation, which focuses on knowledge, skills, and experience. So we will start getting those new templates in a couple of months, but I don't expect that it's going to be anytime very, very soon. So that's been the history under my tenure, really.
I think that's really interesting, especially individually as well. I think for a lot of aspirants as well, but for me as well to try and understand, because I might be jumping ship soon. I've got to do the training for the CSER evaluator side of things soon, and hence I'm trying to understand the KSE domain side of things as well. I do have a couple of documents, but so if we want to share the screen while we talk about it, we'll be able to. But
Yeah.
if you want to walk us through a basic introduction about the whole KSE domains, how they're designed, and what one of the questions that we've gotten a lot of times over the people who've sort of registered today is which one is right for me, which domain is right for me, and how should I design my application? Because back in when I applied, even a year and a half, 2 years back, it was straightforward that this is the application, these are the ILOs that you need to evidence. How I
Sure.
did that was, and I don't know whether this was the right thing, or if, because we don't get feedback about whether this was a good thing, this was a bad thing. But what I did was I went through the whole CCT curriculum. Besides the
Absolutely.
SSG, I think it was very clearly mentioned in the SSGs that this curriculum is your main document. This is what we need to evidence. So what I did was, for all the 19 ILOs in general adult psychiatry, for all the workplace-based assessments, I think one thing that I really, really benefited from the first conversation that I ever had with you. I don't know if you even remember, I texted you on WhatsApp asking you some questions, and you were kind enough to reply. And you said that always make sure that you know the difference between primary evidence and secondary evidence. So now we're actually deep diving into the CSER side of things and getting into the proper nerdy, geeky meat of it. So I think this is us going into the main subject of today. I think the major differences between primary evidence and secondary evidence. While the whole CCT curriculum over a period of 3 years is focused on gathering secondary evidence through workplace-based assessments, the CSER portfolio primarily focuses on primary evidence. So the evaluator doesn't want people to tell the evaluator that, look, he's a good doctor. The evaluator wants to see that he's a good doctor.
Absolutely. I couldn't put it better myself, Manan. So I think if you want me to talk a little bit again about primary and secondary evidence, to reiterate those points, and those points haven't changed. the absolute backbone of a portfolio submission is still going to be the case histories. Good case histories, and the evaluators might practically be kinder on the other aspects of your application. If your case histories are not up to scratch, if they don't show consultant level material, if they don't show that thinking through, then it's going to be difficult to pass an application. And about the case histories, it's not just about collecting the various headings, it's about creative thinking about the aspects we don't usually write in our rushed clinical days. So things about the why am I seeing this patient? I went to see this patient on an urgent home visit because I was requested by a CPN colleague who had an urgent text from a family member expressing concerns that the patient is relapsing. When I just read that line versus I did a home visit and I saw this patient alongside a CPN colleague, you know, but putting in that context, I immediately see a doctor who is approachable, who's proactive, who knows how to deal with crisis, is trusted by MDT colleagues. That bit comes in. Then there's so much of discussion we have with patients about lifestyle changes, metabolic syndrome, on antipsychotics, about taking care of their health, or drug and alcohol. We don't always put the details in letters, and for CSER, for the letters you're selecting, that is important. Then another common mistake is people, doing the history, doing the mental state examination, and then jumping to a diagnosis. You've not actually shown me your thinking through, your formulation. What have you considered? How have you thought through to come to this diagnosis? Sometimes diagnoses might be very clear cut. There are no reasonable differentials, once you've done the formulation, but show me your thinking through. So that's where letters have to be really, really rounded off. And primary evidence about what you do, minutes of meetings where you are chairing, you're taking action points, you're leading the team, you're leading the discussion, you've taken responsibilities. That is much more about yourself than meetings of minutes of meetings where you've just attended, for example. You give me email documentations about you having responded to an emergency situation, clinical or non-clinical. A speaker for your postgraduate program has dropped off and you've stepped in at the last minute, or somebody's on-call rota has a vacancy and you've stepped in at the last minute. So that guidance, which is in my book, which is in the SSGs, which was there before, still remains. That hasn't changed. But whilst we're talking, perhaps it's the right time to make this difference between ILOs, HLOs, and KSE. So let me delve into and explain that. Right. So we had the old curricula, where most of our curricula had 19 ILOs. The details of those ILOs would be different. So let's say, for example, ILO 1 was history taking and examination, but the details of what we want in the history and examination would be different for general adult psychiatry versus forensic versus medical psychotherapy, etc. Out of the 6 CCT specialties we have in psychiatry, 5 were more or less similar. The CAMS curricula has always been very different. The CAMS curriculum had different numbering, different blocks. It was completely different and always very complex. Now, roundabout, I don't know when GMC started making this change, but I definitely got involved in the RCpsych curricular work around 2018, I would say. And that was GMC coming to the various Royal Colleges and saying that you've all got to rewrite your curricula. So it's not just psychiatrists, it was across the board. All of you have to write your curricula according to 9 higher learning outcomes. the HLOs, right? And so where do these 9 domains, where do these 9 HLOs come for? GMC wrote about 9 areas of expertise, or 9 areas of good practice, GPCs. So GPC 1 was about professionalism, GPC 2 was about professional knowledge and skills, GPC 3 was, I forget the exact wording, but it was about legislation and legislative frameworks. Then 4 was about health education, 5 was about leadership and team working, 6 was clinical audit and governance, 7 was about safeguarding vulnerable adults, 8 was teaching, 9 was research. Right. So GMC gave these 9 domains to all the colleges and said, you have to rewrite your curricula according to this 9. Now, in all my years in this country, I have seen this drive towards uniformity and centralization. I think it's a running theme. So just like in 2006, when all the colleges were doing their own thing in recommending people to the specialist register without training, and then PMED becomes and takes over, and all the colleges have got to go through the same route. So in 2018, it was bringing the curricula together. So before this, a psychiatric curriculum by the write up, the numbering, etc., would look very different to the pediatrics curriculum. But now, if you look at the pediatrics curriculum, of course, the content of their domains are going to be completely different. But even for them, HLO1 is professionalism, HLO2 is knowledge and skills and experience, clinical knowledge and skills. For them, HLO8 is teaching, HLO9 is research. So the curricula talk to each other now. And the big thinking beyond it is that if people want to change specialties to show the how much you have got in the non-clinical domains, that transfer over of skills is going to be easier. You can see that. So in fact, we had a lot of input from the College of Pediatrics. We had somebody who sat on our curriculum committee because they had finished writing their curriculum according to the 9 domains when we were starting up, to give us advice about how our HLOs have to reflect the good professional competencies, the GPCs, but the write-up has got to be particular to the specialty that you're doing. So let's say if we put the same thing in research for all the 6 CCT specialties, if we put the same thing for for the HLOs and all the specialties, then GMC might come back and say your CCT specialties aren't very different from each other. Why do you need 6 CCT specialties? So the 6 CCT specialties have got to fit in with the HLOs. Of course, we will be similar to the HLOs of other colleges, but we will obviously have to be different enough for psychiatry to justify place as their specialism and the 6 CCT specialties. So that's where the HLOs came from. Now, the content of these HLOs is not actually massively different from the pre-existing ILOs, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like, what we are expecting people to do on the ground, the level of histories they will take, the range of histories they will take, the range of clinical diagnoses and settings has really changed. It's about the organization. And for once, I like it, because when you look at the 19 ILOs, there's a lot of overlap and repetition. Often, when writing evaluations, it feels like I'm writing the same thing in a couple of domains, right? And then when you do ILO 1 is history taking and examination, ILO 2 is formulation and diagnosis, ILO 3 is management, ILO 4 is risk assessment, but you're still referring to the same case histories over and over again. So it makes sense to put all of it under HLO2. So now when I'll do a new template by HLO2, I can just comment on the case histories and say, yes, they've taken a history, they've done the formulation, they've done holistic management plans and put it in one place rather than repeating the same things over and over again in different boxes, which seem more artificially separated. The same thing about, let's say, we now have HLO1 for professionalism, and that's it.
Mm.
That will have a bit of overlap with HLO5, which is about team working and leadership. But in the old ILOs, there were, it seemed like millions of ILOs there was something about team communication, there was something about team working, there was something about, MDT practices, and it seemed like I was writing the same thing over and over again. So basically, they have been tidied up. It's been tidied up in line of advice of GMC and tidied up in line with what other colleges are doing. So we are much more coherent and centralized, and it's fair for trainees across all specialties and in all colleges. So that's where the HLOs and the new curricula come from. And the new curricula were implemented in August 2022. And for CSER, there was a transition period between, I think August, September 22 to November 23, where people were given the choice. You can go by the old curriculum or the new curriculum. I've yet to see any applications by the new curriculum. I don't know whether they are in the pipeline. And whilst the new curricula were being implemented, now think about the history, the timeline. So August, September 2022, we are saying the new curriculum are all ready, they are stamped, we are publishing them. This is going to be a big change for training. It's going to be a big change for CSER, how you start organizing your material. And then in September 2022, for the first time, I see an email from GMC coming via the Royal College. We have a big legislative change in CSER. We are moving from CCT requirements to knowledge, skills, and experience. And I must say, personally, a little bit selfishly, my heart sank because the manuscript of my book was then 99% ready for submission. But then I read what exactly the email said, and I thought, okay, it's not as big a change as we think it is. Now, I was talking about legislation in the past, right? So GMC takes decisions, the Royal College's advice on it, but it's all bound up by legislation. And this legislation loosening up was saying that this far, whenever we've asked people to apply for CSER, they have always had to meet CCT requirements. Now we are saying they don't have to meet CCT requirements absolutely word by word, as long as they can prove knowledge, skills, and experience to the level of a UK consultant. And the way they do it is still by the HLOs of the higher specialty curriculum. And that seems a little contradictory. When I read that, I said, how does that make sense? CCT means you have to fulfill the HLOs of the higher specialties. So you're telling us that you don't have to do CCT requirements, but you still have to do the HLO requirements of the higher specialty training. How does that work? Now, my understanding is that it probably affects a couple of other specialties where they might have specific directives about doing a specific training in the UK, about a specific sub-qualification in the UK. And that requirement is for CCT, but GMC is now saying, or the legislation has been changed, you cannot demand that they do that particular training in the UK just because you're asking your CCT candidates to do this. If there is an overseas candidate who does a similar overseas training and shows the knowledge, skills, and experience as per that training, then you've got to accept it for a CSER. So that's how it translates. Now, that bit is not very applicable for psychiatry because we have never set something in the psychiatry curriculum to say people have to do this in order to get their CCT. even for mental health legislation, we cannot say that somebody has to get Section 12 approval whilst they are a higher trainee. And the reason why we can't say that is because we've got trainees in Northern Ireland and Scotland who follow a different mental health act. So I think for psychiatry, let's keep it clear. Your basic document is still the higher specialty curricula. Let's not get confused that KSE changes at all. You still read the higher specialty curricula for your application, and then you work from there.
Okay, I'll just put a couple of things here. I think from what I understand from an applicant point of view, this is the GMC telling everyone what a good doctor is. So
Yeah.
we need 9 things in a good doctor, and then the individual Royal College tells that we need this in a good, say, general adult psychiatry doctor. We need this in a good camp, broad stroke understanding. That the GMC defines what a good doctor is,
Not
and then
just a good doctor, a good consultant
the
in
doctor
the
is.
UK. Yeah.
And then the Royal Colleges define what a good subspecialty consultant is. I think one of the things that I see a lot of times during my MRC psych journey and then during my CSER journey as well, which I'll just add here, like won't go into massive depth, is a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about the Royal College or the GMC being discriminatory towards a particular caste, creed, color. You've got two people who are not from the UK standing beside you talking about how CSER, they've been happy with CSER 20 years back and today as well, 15, 20 years back and today as well. I don't think any aspirants should believe in the fact that the college or the GMC is discriminatory, or the systems are flawed, or the CASC exam is flawed, or the CSER is flawed. Look, this is what it is. Like, I'm someone who strongly advocates that, you want to practice in this country, and hence this country very well has the rights to decide what it wants in a doctor, and this is what it wants in a doctor. Now let's move on. Let's talk about how to deal with it. Don't waste your time criticizing the system, because no system, like when we moved from a different country to a different country, we always romanticize moving countries, and we feel that the country that we're moving, I think every international medical graduate or anyone who's ever changed countries in their lives has been through that journey where we initially romanticize a country and we feel that that place is going to be perfect. No country is perfect, no system's perfect. This is what it is. Let's deal with this, and let's try and create a good portfolio application for this.
Absolutely. I think we do still need to be aware of differential attainment and the fact that it exists, and that we do have a duty, organizationally, if we are part of an organization, to make sure that international medical graduates are supported. So yes, the CASC is not discriminatory. There is a lot of effort put in for being objective, for training doctors, etc. The same for CSER. But we have to be mindful that somebody who has not had to move countries might have a better grounding and easier circumstances compared to IMGs who, go through some pretty difficult times, practical difficulties, childcare, trying to get to know a different culture. English is not our first language, getting to know the nuances. So we have to put in a lot more of effort. That is absolutely clear. And I think the organizations who do encourage us, support us coming over from our countries and say that, yes, we want you to work in the NHS, do also have a duty to support people to fill in those gaps so that we are on a level playing field when we go into these competitive exams and processes. Yeah, there's two sides to the story.
Absolutely, absolutely, 100%. And I think um, one of the things that makes CSER very individual is the fact that you've got to need that support from the organization, which I think,
Absolutely.
luckily enough, most organizations, because they're a bit short on consultants, they do want you, they do want to retain you. They do, if you're sincere and if you're straightforward and honest, they do want to retain you and support with the
Sure.
CSER process. So I think one of the main takeaways from the KSE side of things is, as far as psychiatry is concerned, one thing that when I started off my CSER journey, I spent at least a good couple of months trying to identify what language do I use.
Hmm.
The main being, what language do I use? I mean, what are the basic concrete structures based on which I create my application? What is it that I want to evidence, and what are the things that makes a good doctor, or what the evaluator wants. So what I did was that I used all 19 ILOs, and specifically even sub ILOs. And what I did was, for every workplace, there's a column in the SSG, in the curriculum, in this higher training curriculum, where there is a workplace based assessment mentioned next to every sub ILO. Let's say
Yeah.
1C, 1D. I removed that column, and I made two more columns saying primary evidence and secondary evidence.
Brilliant. Yeah.
So for every sub ILO, there was a column which said primary evidence and secondary evidence. This helped me simplify as to
Mhm.
what is that is missing in my application and what's there that is there. So along with my CV, I had uploaded this. That my main CV document in my CSER application said CV and mapping of evidence. So the way I had mapped my evidence is that, for this sub ILO, because I think that from what I attended, the CSER seminars that I attended, the main key takeaway was ILOs, which now is HLOs, is the language of your application.
Yeah.
If it comes back saying that, look, you don't have this sub ILO or sub HLO.
Yeah.
So I think for aspirants, I don't know if you would advocate this, but I think that helped me simplify that, for this one, this is my primary evidence, this is my secondary evidence. What I also did was, in that reflection, because I remember attending one of your seminars where you said that, you've made a decent clinic letter, but tell me what you've thought. How did you come to this diagnosis? And hence,
Yeah.
what I did was, for every piece of evidence that I had uploaded, be it a clinic letter, be it minutes of meeting, or be it email communication with colleagues, there's a reflection at the first page. And that
Hmm.
reflection said that, what are the ILOs that I'm evidencing in this piece of evidence? And what are the things that I
Yeah.
have thought today? So the reflection tells the evaluator as to, look, this is what I'm thinking, and this is what I need to evidence. You've got this piece of evidence, which is this clinic letter, or this
Yes.
email chain with a colleague, or these minutes of meeting where whatever I've said is highlighted. But at the
Yeah.
same time, I'm telling you what I've thought during this case, during this mental health act assessment, and these are the evidences these are the ILOs or sub ILOs that I'm trying to evidence through it. Do you think that's a simple place to start to um, pick
That
the piece?
is excellent. That is absolutely, excellent piece of advice. I couldn't say anything better about that. Another practical piece, if I'll add over here, is the most difficult stage is getting started.
Yeah.
Once you get started, it's like you have formed a nucleus, and the nucleus is attracting more material. But it's that building of the nucleus. Where do I start? And my practical advice at most of my teaching has been, you need headspace and you need time. So take a weekend out, or take study leave, take a full week out, clear your diary, clear your head, sit at your computer and think, what do I already have? Because at this stage, people are thinking of applying for CSER. It's not like they are working up their expertise from now. They probably have the expertise. Many of them are working as locum consultants. Many of them have years of expertise. So it's about getting the evidence together. It's not like they are building their expertise from this stage. And once you have this feeling of, yes, I've already made a start, I've got some evidence, then the rest of it starts falling together. So it's a good starting point to first look at the curriculum and have a look at what it's asking for, match it against the specialty specific guidance, and make a list of things that I could produce. And then during the week that people make a start, collect the electronic documents of the things you already have. You might already have good clinic letters that you want to present. You might already have those emails, those project reports, research publications. You collect everything that you have for the 9 ILOs. And somehow, even though it's the same content, 9 ILOs just sounds better than 19, sorry, 9 HLOs sounds better than 19 ILOs. It sounds a lot neater. You put in your teaching, your research, your leadership, your education, evidence. You put all that is there. And then, as you said, make a list of other things that I could reasonably produce. So if you suddenly think that I'm going to finish a research project in the next 6 months. That might not be practical. But what could I practically do? What's the easier thing to do? About writing those appraisals, or just attending the good medical practice training, or attending a critical appraisal training. Let me do that, do the simplest thing possible, and then set an a program, a timeline by which I'm going to get those additional bits together. And every 2 months or so, sit down with the portfolio and have a look at, how am I doing? You've got to keep a timeline on the progress. And it's also good to keep a deadline for yourself. If you don't keep a deadline of, I'm going to put in my application in the next year or so, or I'm going to put in my application in the next 18 months, things can stretch on forever. Set a deadline for yourself. And the last thing is that your portfolio doesn't have to be 100% at the time you are pressing the submit button on GMC, because you will be given a certification officer who's going to look through things and come and ask for stuff anyway. Your application, your evidence is not locked until it has gone to the evaluators. So I would say, cleverly and strategically, to save time, because the moment you give it to GMC, it will take time for certification officers to be allocated. It will take time for them to look through your portfolio and give you further advice, etc. You might as well start that process if you've got 3 or 4 documents that you're still working on. So yeah,
Yeah.
get it started at 95-96%. Don't wait for 100%.
I think a couple of points that I observed was a couple of key takeaways from what you said. I just wanted to add, when you said that it's fascinating, Dr. Nandini, that right now you've got all 9 HLOs by heart, and you know what each HLO is. And I think this is something that every asset, like when I was preparing my application, I knew the while there is ILO 19s, I think a couple of them have been removed. So it's a
Yeah.
total of 16 or 17 ILOs. And that's the key takeaway, that you need to know the ILOs or HLOs that you're preparing for by heart, because that's the language that you're using when you're preparing an application or evaluating an application. If you're struggling as to where do you want to start, look at the HLOs. That's the language that you're using. Even
Yeah.
with the new KSE domains, it's
Mhm.
this is your core, this is your pillars on which you want to build that.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you why I got the HLOs, trying to get them by heart. I still have the ILOs, at least up till 12 or 13 by heart. The reason, as an evaluator, is when I first started doing evaluations, and it was the first time I had read the curriculum in detail. After having been an educational and clinical supervisor for a couple of years, this was the first time I was reading the curriculum actually line by line. So I read ILO 1, and then I looked through the entire portfolio, all 1,000 pages, looking for evidence for ILO 1. Then I looked at ILO 2, again looked through thousands of pages, and that was a very time consuming process. As an evaluator, as I got the ILOs almost by heart, I could look through the first 10 pages and make notes. Okay, this page, I'll make a note in ILO 1, ILO 2, ILO 4. Okay, next page. And then I could bring the paragraphs together. So I wasn't having to go through the portfolio 19 times for 19 ILOs. I could actually look at a page and know which ILOs to put in from that page. And as an applicant, it's the same thing. The moment you get a piece of evidence, you're automatically thinking, I've added to this ILO, that now it'll be HLO, so this bit is relevant for this HLO, that HLO. Now, don't duplicate the evidence. When you're uploading evidence, don't duplicate the same document over and over again. The evaluators will find it. If they find stuff that is relevant for multiple HLOs, you might want to put in a reflection to say that I think this evidence that I've put in other domains is also relevant for this domain. But don't make it bulkier than you need to.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that the GMC is also very good at is removing any evidence which comes in again a couple of times. So
Yeah.
upon reflection, when I submitted I'll give you a rough timeline on when the application went in and what happened, just so that, like you said, that even if it's 95%, that's also okay to submit it, because, like I say, came to this country April 2021, submitted July 2022. I kept June as my deadline. When I came
Yeah.
into this country, I knew that within 12 months I want to submit, because I knew you were someone who had submitted within 18 months. I read this very early on somewhere, and I was like, I need to take a leaf out of that book and see if we can at least submit an application. What's the worst that could happen? I had no idea that, because what I had heard was the first time pass rate is about 30%. Second time pass rate is a good, healthy pass rate. So
Over
I
80%. Mhm. Yeah.
over 80%. So what I had learned upon reflection then was that you submit your application July 22. It it went through the whole GMC process for a good healthy 6 months. So I was
Mhm.
still making changes to it, adding documents, subtracting documents.
Absolutely.
The GMC person who was assigned to me was fabulous. She was really good. She was patient with me. She would tell me that, look, this might change, this might change. From what my experience is, you might want to move this from this one to this one. And hence, one thing that I learned, which I wish I had done early on, is name your documents. So one of the things that I did was I clubbed a couple of documents, which you shouldn't do, because every document that you've got from, say, I had 3 different institutes.
Mhm.
So never merge the documents from two of those institutes, even if both of them were from India, because the India supervisor or referee needs to sign one of these documents from. So for every page, you need to have a document that says. So what I did was I numbered my documents. So all
Mhm.
the documents were starting from MT, my initials, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There were a
Yeah.
total of 76 documents. So about
Mhm.
15, 20 documents from each organization, and then each document, the number of pages that you've submitted, will go to the last form that you fill out for your referees to sign. So always be precise.
Verifiers, rather. It's the
Verify.
verifiers. So you've got your referees and you've got your verifiers. Yeah, that's right.
Sorry. Yeah.
Mhm.
So verifiers will sign that off. So don't merge
Mhm.
those documents. Like Dr. Nandini said, the HLOs. What I did was, because that's one of the things that I thought as well. As an evaluator, what is an application that I'd like to see? I'd like to see a simple application where the candidate knows that, this is my HLO. So what I then did retrospectively, which I wish I had done earlier, was in front of each sub ILO, I had just mentioned clinic letters initially, or I had
Mhm.
mentioned clinic letters, discharge summaries. Then what I did was I mentioned the document number.
Mhm.
So against ILO 1B, there is document number MT 37, 38, 39, 40, or if it's clinic letters, MT 1 to 50. So the
Okay.
evaluator knows that, look, for this sub ILO, I need to click this document, which is MT whatever.
Okay.
And then the
I'll tell
documents
you
are
one.
also, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
sorry.
I'll just clarify one thing though. You might have these different documents in PDFs, Microsoft Word, etc., etc. When GMC sends it to an evaluator, whether in the college or directly, GMC now has appointed some evaluators with whom they correspond directly. They send us one single PDF document, beautifully organized. So don't worry
Oh,
about that. I don't have
oh,
to click on hundreds of documents. So it's all
okay.
beautifully ordered: domain one, domain two, domain three, domain four. That's the old curricular thing that they are still using. And under each, they have put in all the documents in place. And it's one of those PDF documents where if I click on domain three, let us say, it takes me directly to that page. There again, they've put a cover page, and every application I get has the same pattern. So actually, GMC do that stuff for you, I think. I don't think people
Oh,
have put in all that. So,
oh,
number of documents, etc., and keeping the organization documents separate so that GMC can send it to different people practically for the verification is fine. For the evaluators, don't worry. It'll be
they
beautifully
do.
organized, bookmarked, and sent to evaluators so that I can scroll through just one PDF document of 1,000 pages back and forth, and that's it.
Okay, I think that's really helpful to know. Thank you for that, because I think what I was thinking was that it would be that way. But yeah, okay, that makes it much more simpler then. Right.
Just one
One
thing
of
over
the
there. Sorry, Manan, sorry for interrupting. Just one thing there. If you put in triangulated evidence, you've
Hmm,
seen a patient, assessed, then a couple of reviews, then maybe patient got admitted, a tribunal report. If you're presenting information on a single patient journey, make sure that is a single document.
yeah,
Because when GMC is ordering those documents, because those are anonymized documents, if they send those back and forth, then I won't make any sense of the triangulation. So make sure
hmm,
that your triangulation is very clear so that it comes to the evaluator in that format. Sorry, that one bit.
yeah, absolutely. I think I did that when I was doing court reports. I thought that it would not make sense to just put a court report
Hmm.
and not put any letters or discharge summaries associated with that court report. So what I did was I merged all of them and made it into one document. I think upon reflection, yeah, the document numbering, okay, it's great that the GMC does that, but it helped me simplify things or make a mind map on my own as well. That look, this
Absolutely.
document is here, this document is here, this evidence is. One of the other questions that I keep getting asked, Dr. Nandini, is that while MRC Psych, I'm mindful, is not necessary for a CSER
Mhm.
application, it's because you've got only the last 5 years of evidence that you can use. And if you don't have MRC Psych, so for all those people, just to clarify from what I know, is that if you've got MRC Psych, you don't need to prove core training experience. Whereas if you don't have MRC Psych, you need to prove core training and higher training. Now,
Right.
that in my head becomes a bit more tricky because um, then I'm proving 6 years of evidence in the last 5 years of evidence. Whereas with MRC Psych, I just need to prove 3 years of higher training using the last 5 years of evidence, which is submissible.
Okay.
Please tell us more about the whole MRC Psych side of things and
Okay.
how does that work?
Okay. First of all, let me clarify the timelines, right? So, before the new legislation, the timelines were that your evidence had to come within the last 5 chronological years, notwithstanding career gaps, less than full time training. All your evidence had to be within the last 5 years, and that's it. But even in that legislation, the old legislation, MRC Psych did not have an expiry date. So there
Okay.
are two ways that MRC Psych was important. First of all, you have the eligibility to apply for CSER, and not everybody was eligible. Most people would be eligible, but to be eligible to apply for CSER, you needed to have either 6 months of approved continuous training in the UK or overseas, and or a specialist qualification. So if somebody had not done organized training but still managed to get their MRC Psych, they would be eligible to apply for CSER and for any of the CCT specialties, in fact. But if they didn't have MRC Psych, they needed to be at least 6 months in a core training post or overseas. Now, if somebody overseas had done training but not their exams, that would also make them eligible. And this again did not have a timeline. So, whenever you did training or whenever you did your qualification, that eligibility stood, right? The bit with the MRC Psych was taken as the only sign off for core competencies. So, as you said, that if they had MRC Psych, you can just concentrate on the higher specialty training. If you didn't have MRC Psych, you had to evidence the core competencies as well, which was basically putting in a few cases from the specialties that you were not applying in. So if you were doing general adult, you needed to put in a bit of old age and CAMS or LD and move it around that way. But other than that, it's not like you had to put in things for all 19 core ILOs practically. So that's how things worked. Now, things have changed since 30th of November. And that's perhaps the right time to start talking about cohorts as well, because that's important for these timelines and eligibilities and core competencies. So the timelines have changed. So we are no longer fixed on this 5 years for evidence. The timelines are not very easy to talk about because they are different for different HLOs. I've just started going through them, and I will know them better when we start actively doing evaluations. But read the SSGs, and it will become clear that the timelines are no longer 5 years. So, for example, I was just looking at the timelines for HLO1 for professionalism, where you can put in your appraisals, you can put in your 360 degree, you can put in, meetings that you've attended, basically to show your professional links and relationships, that kind of evidence. And now the timeline for that is it's 5 working years, not 5 chronological years, and up to a maximum of 10 chronological years. So as long as it is within 5 working years and chronologically within 10 working years, it's fine. And you'll have to look for every HLO, for every specialty, what the timelines are. But the timelines have definitely been opened up. Now coming to where does MRC Psych help or not? We've now got these 3 cohorts: cohort 1A, cohort 1B, and cohort 2. Now, cohort 2 is people have not completed core training. They would actually still have to have the eligibility criteria. So they must have done at least 6 months of approved training in the UK or overseas. The eligibility criteria haven't changed. But cohort 2 are people who haven't completed their core training, nor do they have a specialist qualification in the UK or overseas. So their portfolio requirements are very much what was there for the old curricula, including core competencies, only organized by 9 HLOs, right?
Hmm.
Then you have cohort 1A and cohort 1B. Cohort 1B are people who have completed their core training. So they've got their ARCP outcome with or without MRC Psych, but they do not have specialist experience. So this is somebody who would have, done their core training and maybe not passed their MRC Psych. Then they would directly go into cohort 1B. Now, what about the people who have completed their core training and done their MRC Psych or equivalent? The current SSGs now use the word equivalent as well. So this is actually now giving credibility to overseas qualifications. Even if you've not had an MRC Psych, but if you say, I've done MD from India, I've done my core training in India and I did my MD in India, but I didn't work as a consultant. I didn't go into any higher training. And if you can give the syllabus and the curriculum to prove to GMC, then you are in cohort 1B as well. Now, if you have completed core training in UK or another country, you've done your specialist qualification, MRC Psych or equivalent, and you have 2 years of higher specialist training or working as a consultant, either in the UK or overseas, then you are in cohort 1A. Now, how does being in cohort 1A, 1B, and 2 differ? You need to prove core competencies only in cohort 2. So, previously, we've had people saying that I've done my core training, I didn't do my MRC Psych, but I was told that all my core competencies have been signed off. But I'm still having to prove my core competencies because I didn't have MRC Psych. So that's the slight bit of lightening. If you've got your core competencies signed off, then concentrate on the higher training bit. That's the little bit of lightening. And what does being in cohort 1A mean? It means that you can put in a lesser bulk of evidence. I was having a read this morning just in general adult psychiatry about, what's the difference in the evidence. And when I looked at HLO1 professionalism, there's not much difference between cohort 1A, 1B, or 1C. The big difference is always in HLO2, as you can expect. HLO2 is the cream of the curricula. And even if you look at curricula across Royal Colleges, you can expect overlaps in teaching and research and clinical audit and quality improvement, etc., etc. HLO2 is what we do clinically. That is what is the cream of our specialty, right? So
Mm.
that is going to be the biggest difference between different cohorts and between different curricula. When you're putting in a portfolio for forensic or general adult, HLO 1 to barring HLO2 and then HLO3 to 9 might be fairly similar. HLO2 is going to be the big difference. So within HLO2, what they have said is if you're in cohort 1A, we expect around 10 case histories. For cohort 2, we expect around 20 case histories. For 1B, we expect 20 histories, and cohort 2, we expect what we have always known, the 30 histories. However, what you prove in those 10, 20, or 30 histories is still the knowledge, skills, and experience needed for HLO2. So if you feel personally that you're not giving a widespread experience demonstration enough in 10 or 20 histories, by all means go up on that. Nobody's stopping you from submitting more, right? It's just that if we see somebody who's worked as a locum consultant, has got MRC Psych, and they've been, working as a locum consultant, or they're even in higher training for 2 years, then we won't frown upon 10 cases and we will see what they have submitted over there. And for cohort 1B and 2, they've specified it has to be different clinical settings, there are different diagnoses, a lot of things have to be covered. For 1A, there's less coverage expected, only each of those 10 letters submitted need to be of very, very high standard. So that's kind of an initial introduction to the changes that have come in.
I've got a couple of follow-up questions to this
Uh-huh.
one. Thank you for that useful piece of information. I think one of the things that you get asked mainly about, and one of the things that I've always had questions about as well, I've got a couple of colleagues who have done their MD in psychiatry in India. Now,
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I've always thought is a lot of my India colleagues simplify it by saying that I've done 3 years of core training in India and then I'll do my higher training in the UK. It's a way to look at it, but at the same time what I'm also thinking is that 3 years of training in India puts you on the specialist register, whereas in the UK you are on the specialist register after 6 years of training. So I don't know if you can equate the MD in psychiatry to the end of core training here, also because the curriculum, while on paper might be similar, is very different, because in India you're much more focused on clinics. So if someone wants to do their CSER in CAMS, so like for me, it was a bit more simpler because I wanted to do general psychiatry. So the MD from India is still general psychiatry, the MRC Psych general psychiatry. Now, I know that in CSER they've said that the SSG, the previous SSG, it was said that for every subspecialty that you're applying, be it say older people's or CAMS, you need to have some sort of training in that subspecialty. Um, so would that MD in psychiatry in India, which is still very much general psychiatry, it's not general adult, because as you know, in India, you still do your CAMS and older people's and everything.
Mhm.
Would I still be able to apply for a CAMS CSER or a forensic CSER based on the MD psychiatry in India and MRC psych, or would I need to do some sort of 6 month, some MSc or some sort of training here in that subspecialty?
If you can prove through the curriculum or the syllabus of your MD, and because MDs in different universities might have their curricula written up in different ways, if you can show in the curriculum coverage that old age or forensic or whatever you're trying to apply for has been covered, then it lets you apply for that specialty. I asked this of a GMC colleague many years ago, uh, somebody with MRC Psych, but who hasn't done 6 months in forensic. Could they apply for a forensic CSER if they have been working as a specialty doctor in forensic for many years, but they haven't done an approved training. And the answer I got was MRC Psych allows you to apply for any of the 6 CCT specialties. So even if you haven't done the 6 months training, the specialty covers for it. And the eligibility, as it was then and still stands, is and or. So
Mm.
the qualification doesn't have to be specifically for forensic or medical psychotherapy or CAMS, but if it is a specialist qualification in psychiatry, which as part of its curriculum, you can prove that the coverage is across those subspecialties as well, then you are allowed to apply for them.
Okay, I think that's really helpful. So this opens the door for a lot of my colleagues who say are now working in CAMS or older peoples and want to do their CSER there, but they don't have a specialist training per se. How much value would an evaluator, would the college put on, say, a degree like MSc, or would that still count as secondary evidence, or would it add value to your application?
See, the qualifications per se, just on the merit of a qualification, has never been important to an evaluator.
Mm.
So, technically, if somebody has an MRC Psych up till this time, all I needed to look at was fine, they have MRC Psych. I'm not going to look for core competencies. I'm just going to look at the evidence for their higher specialty. And that was it. But it didn't mean that I was expecting the level of their cases to be any higher or lower. Right. So even if somebody didn't have an MRC Psych and was applying for general adult, it meant that I would look out in their portfolio whether they had given those old age and neurodevelopmental cases, but it didn't mean that I was setting the bar any higher or lower for them for the general adult cases. I would still look at their general adult evidence with the same level expectation and the same lens that I would for somebody with an MRC Psych, if that
Mm.
makes sense. So, the one thing I think psychiatry evaluators are good at, and what we've always done, is we have given credibility and importance to every piece of evidence matching it against the curriculum. Just
Mm.
because somebody's got an MSc or somebody's got a qualification doesn't mean that we jump a hoop and say, fine, they've got that qualification, I'm going to take off a couple of their ILOs. And I wouldn't be able to do that because the way we are expected to write a template, and GMC runs a very thorough quality check on what we write. So I couldn't write one line in history taking and say, I have read the histories, they are good, and I think that they fulfill ILO 1. No, I've got to give exact quotes and exact evidence of this is what a candidate has covered and this is what matches with the curriculum, and hence I think they have passed the ILO. And having an MSc or having an MD per se doesn't pass any of the ILOs or HLOs at the moment. So having the qualification will decide which cohort you go into and what
Mm.
timelines and what kind of evidence will be expected. But when I read the evidence, I'm going to match it against the curriculum.
To round off this, would I be right to say that, say, if someone has an MD in psychiatry or a I forgot, FCPS, I think is the qualification that they do in Pakistan.
Mhm.
I think they do an MD in Africa as well. So if I say that someone has an MD or a FCPS in psychiatry, general psychiatry, they've got MRC Psych, and then they put up a really good portfolio for old age, but
Yeah.
they don't have an MSc or something in old age, or they don't have an MSc or something in child and adolescent, they would still, based on their primary evidence and these qualifications, that's MRC Psych and MD, they would be eligible for a decent, they wouldn't need any more qualifications if their
No,
evidence is
no,
good.
no. And, whether they need a qualification or not, what is their eligibility? Are they allowed to apply? That is for GMC to decide. So once
Okay.
I've got the bundle, as far as I'm thinking, is that that background check has been done by GMC. So I'm not going to question the evidence, or I'm not going to question the eligibility of whether this person should have been allowed to apply for this specialty. Do they have the eligibility? That's not for me as an evaluator to check. I expect GMC has done that. I will delve straight into the competencies. What does the curriculum say? Do I have the evidence for that? That's my duty as an evaluator, and I'll stick to that.
And by any chance, have you known of GMC to reject such portfolios where, say, someone's applying for CAMS and they've got, but like you said, MRC Psych does give you the qualification to apply. Okay. I think that answers that question, doesn't
Yeah,
it? So if I'm applying, if
definitely.
I've got MRC Psych, I'll be able to apply for CAMS or older people's.
You will be able to apply for any of the 6 CCT specialties. And I hope people are also aware of the non-CCT specialties, which is another creative bit and another flexible approach allowed by the CSER pathway, but not the CCT pathway.
Please do tell us more about that, because I know of one person who's done their specialist register in neuropsychiatry, I think, which is not
Yeah,
a CCT subspecialty. But please tell
absolutely.
us more about what subspecialties have you seen, non-CCTs, what subspecialties have you seen?
In my time, I have seen one application from Australia in liaison psychiatry, and the neuropsychiatry one, which was published in the Insight. The background to that was from South Africa. Again, to give the history and context over there, let's say a country wants to bring very niche specialists from other countries, and it's a very, very niche specialist skill, which isn't worth running a CCT rotation on. But I if I ask this person to give evidence for a wider CCT specialty, they wouldn't be able to. So, just hypothetically, let us say that we've got a specialist in some country who is very well known for doing surgeries in a very, very niche area. And I want to bring that specialist over. But if I ask that person to prove specialism in general psychiatry or the CCT specialties in psychiatry available on the UK register, they would struggle to give the evidence because for 30 years they've been doing only this niche surgery, right? Now, the non-CCT CSER was created for these people. And what it said was you can apply for a specialty um, outside the list of CCT specialties as long as you have an overseas qualification and or overseas training for at least 6 months in the specialty that you're applying for. Right, so these people in liaison psychiatry and neuropsychiatry had specialist qual. So the Australia portfolio I had looked through myself, and this person had done a 3-year rotation in liaison psychiatry. So that's how it worked in Australia, New Zealand, and we were happy to recommend that for specialist registration. So where does that, how does that help you? And this shows how, there's a context and history and a thinking behind a certain law, but then it can get translated to something else. So we have people who are working, let us say, in addiction services. We have people working in perinatal, in eating disorders, in rehabilitation psychiatry, who've been very, very experienced specialists there for years and years. But if you ask them to produce a portfolio for general adult, it's not impossible. It is still possible, but it is a lot of effort. It means that this very experienced specialty doctor will have to go to other places to try and bring the range of general adult experience into their portfolio. So let's say hypothetically, if this doctor went overseas and did a 6 months training or got an overseas qualification, they could still give the evidence from within the UK. The law never specified where the evidence should come from. So it specified
Hmm.
that to be eligible, you have to have overseas training and or qualification, but it never specified where the evidence could be produced from. It does lead to a slight, you could say unfairness. Let's say we have 2 doctors working for 5 years in an addiction service. One doctor has always worked and trained in the UK, has no overseas training, no overseas qualification. This doctor cannot apply for an addiction CSER. But the other doctor who's perhaps working in the same place is doing the same job for the last 5 years, but before that might have trained and qualified overseas and can prove that for 6 months they worked in an overseas addictions department doing an overseas addictions training for at least 6 months, they would be eligible to apply for an addiction CESR and give the evidence from the job in the UK. So that's just something to be aware of. Sometimes people who have worked in more niche specialties say, just to go and do general adult, the whole spread all over again is just beyond it. Would you consider going overseas to, I don't know, Australia, Canada, doing 6 months over there? Might be an interesting experience, and it would bring your eligibility. You don't have to collect all the evidence there. You could come and give, your 5 years, 10 years of experience now in the UK and have a specialist registration. It's no longer CSER, remember. Now people are not going to get CSER, they're just going to get specialist registration. So they will get a specialist registration in eating disorders. And that non-CCT application is still on the books, and the eligibility of it still stands.
Fascinating. I think I'm mindful that you've told me that you're here for a maximum of 90 minutes, and I've not even run through half of the questions that we've gotten for this. I'll try and do the last couple of questions. One, while we're talking about international recognition, I think a very, very well sort of known thing, I don't want to say known thing, but a lot of people do keep saying that, go for CCT because it's more internationally recognized. Is this something that, like, is CSER less internationally recognized, or do you know? Because frankly, I don't know the answer to that, and hence when anyone asks me, because the only country that I had explored outside of India was the UK, and now that I'm on the special register for the UK, I am least bothered about which country recognizes my CSER and doesn't. But just for the people who want to know, do you know much about which countries do? Is CCT more recognized than CSER, or how does that work? What?
Okay. And first of all, I think it is definitely worth mentioning and reiterating that in the UK, once you're on the specialist register, how you run your career is entirely up to you. Having a CSER is not going to hold you back. It hasn't held me back now being the national lead for psychiatry recruitment. And if a CSER hasn't held me back there, definitely it's not holding you back on anything in the UK. About other countries, now it's not that simplistic to say that CCT is more recognized than CSER, full stop. There are lots of other nuances and complications over there because there are more than 200 countries in the world. Do all these countries even have a process for recognizing any overseas qualification? Not all countries do. So the notion that if you've got a CCT, you can go and work 100% anywhere in the world, and with CSER you can't, is not right. This, if I just talk closer to home, right? Europe, and Europe has two specialties, which is general adult and CAMS. So outside general adult and CAMS, for the four other CCT specialties, whether you have a CSER or a CCT, doesn't matter. You will not be recognized as a specialist. And this I can tell you with experience from, whilst I was Associate Dean for Equivalence, I've heard about this case where somebody with a CCT in old age was trying to get on the specialist register of a particular European country and was not recognized, not because of the CCT, but was said that we don't recognize old age as a specialty. And I had somebody attend one of my very, very early CSER seminars training in the college, who was a forensic consultant with a forensic CCT, now thinking about applying for general adult CSER because the European country she was relocating to did not recognize forensic, but said for general adult, Bring us any qualification and we will think about putting you on the specialist register. So it's not an all or none thing. So for people who are thinking in that direction, and first of all, you've got to be clear, do you want to stay in the UK or not? Right. If you don't want to stay in the UK, which other country are you thinking about for your career? And look into the specific rules of that country. Now, for Australia, New Zealand, yes, I accept that CCT is more acceptable. For CSER, they say it's a case by case basis. For Canada, I know it's not just your CCT certificate. Yes, they will accept people for CCT, but they also want more ground evidence of your training portfolio as TPD. I've been TPD in the past. I've been asked to give letters about, yes, this person was in our deanery and has done the training, etc. So it's not just like producing your specialist registration and your outcome 6 and CCT certificate gets you like this everywhere. So every country is different, every specialty is different. If you're going to go to another country, research not just between CCT and CSER, but if it's important, you've got to research which specialty you're taking up, because not all specialties are recognized throughout the world as subspecialties of psychiatry.
I think I didn't know that about the whole Europe thing. I knew about the Australia New Zealand thing, and I've heard things about them. I think usually we get asked about Australia, New Zealand, Middle Eastern countries, and parts of USA, which I think they sort of do recognize. Some parts of USA, some states in the USA do recognize the UK Specialist Register, but I think that's very niche as well.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for the conversation. I would finally also like for you to request you to talk about the whole book and the journey before we call it a day, and what inspired you to write this book, and please tell us more about where people can find it, order it, and how is the best way to navigate through the book.
Okay. So the book was always an idea. And, at one point I thought I should write quite a detailed article for the psychiatric bulletin, but that somehow didn't happen. And then ultimately it was there at the back of my mind that I had material enough for a book. So I put in the structure, put in the proposal for the book to Cambridge University publishers in when was it? I signed off the contract in 2021. So I would have started the conversation with them in late 2020 or early 2021. Then in 21, they accepted the proposal. And the timeline was that I had to put in the first manuscript by February, March 22. And it was everything happens for a reason. I remember I went to Calcutta in January 22, and that was when Omicron had raised its head. And just before we were traveling out, we were told that we had to quarantine in India for a week when we reached there, which isn't great when you're going to India for 2 weeks and then you've got to quarantine for 8 days. But actually 80% of my book was written in quarantine. I remember that. So it worked out well. And I had lots of support. I'm actually the main editor for the book, and I have written substantial parts of it, but I have had input from the other colleagues in the equivalence committee. I've got a foreword written by the then dean, Dr. Kate Lovett, and afterward by Helen Bruce. So it's just brings a lot of memories and people together. And then the reviews of the book were in, and the changes, and by September 2022 we were ready to start the proofreading. And that's when the KSE framework came in. I quickly inserted a short chapter kind of explaining what we knew was going to come out of KSE. And then we added chapters, modified slightly so that my book would have a shelf life, that it wouldn't go out of date within a year. And then the proofreading, it takes a much longer than you think. And finally, the book being published on the 3rd of August 2023. It's very widely available, because what I realized going through reputed publishers, Cambridge University Press is obviously partners of the Royal College of Psychiatrists, is that they take care of all the other logistics. So, in terms of the publicity of the book and the portals of where it is available. And when I Googled for the book myself, I was really surprised to find that it's on every website that I could think of. So you could buy it off Amazon, you could buy it directly off Cambridge University Press, and I have a tweet out over there. There's a discount available until I think March or so, and the code, etc., that's there if you directly get it through Cambridge University Press. But then, if you go through the Royal College of Psychiatrists and log into your RCPsych account and buy it through that, and then go through publications and buy it, you get a discount as a Royal College member anyway, if you've got an MRC Psych. It's available on W.H. Smith, Abbey Books, I also found, and some other book retailers who I've never heard about. I think you can also get it on Amazon.in. So it's basically, for people to buy it, if you just Google the title of the book, I think it comes up on any website, and whatever is available in your country, you can order it online. That's how it works. And I've also learned that nowadays the way publishers publish books is, it's not published in bulk straight away, and then the first edition sells out. They actually publish in chunks according to the demand. So hopefully, as long as there is a demand, they will keep publishing the book before we go into a second edition. And I think I will do a second edition only after I've got enough examples from the HLOs and the new template, so that I can put in that experience about what's working and what's not working. I think with the major changes that have come in, we are not looking for any other major changes for another 10 years at least. PMED-B was 2006. Then GMC absorbed PMED-B. That was round about 2010, so 4 years later. And then that structure has now worked from 2010 to 2023. In terms of legislative changes, the last major legislative change was 2006, and then in 2022. So that's as long as legislative changes take time. So, I don't expect we are going to go any big on that. In terms of curricula, our last curricula were probably dated around 2013 or so, though there have been revisions which have gone until 2019. But then a big curricular change, you're looking 2013, and then in 2022. So they have a shelf life of around about 9-10 years. So, I think we can work with what we have for another 9 or 10 years easily. In terms of navigating the book, I've started with, history, figures. There's also a chapter on people's experiences. And then there are case templates. We often get people asking, what kind of template should I be writing my case histories on? And it's not set in stone. But because there was a demand for people asking for more guidance, I've put in case templates written by my specialist colleagues for every CCT specialty. We've got a couple of case templates for everything. And then we've got anonymized evaluations. And though that will change to the HLO template, even with the 19 ILOs, I think you can still make a sense of the kind of detail that evaluators are going into. You might call it ILO 10 in the old curriculum. You're still going to call it HLO 6 or 7, I forget now, clinical audit and governance. So, but the material is still going to be the same. So people can still take pointers from that.
I think thank you so much for being you. I think you are someone that right from when I was still in India and I was researching about CSER very early on, I was going on the Royal College website, and I still remember this very vividly. that I saw that the Associate Dean of CSER at that time is Nandini Chakraborty, and I'm like, oh, she's Indian. And I looked up and I searched about you, and you've been an inspiration ever since. Right from submitting my first CSER portfolio, and you've always been kind enough to answer queries, also agreed to this. So thank you for being you. It feels absolutely, I feel really proud that someone who's an international medical graduate, a little more so from India, is doing so well, has created such good career landmarks, which I think inspires not only me but a lot of international medical graduates and psychiatry residents all throughout, irrespective. That it's if we don't need to always play by the rules. We don't need to always fit into a particular box to be able to succeed in life. And I think your life and your career is testament to that. Um, I would still love to keep going on, but I know we're short on time, and I would love to invite you again over to discuss CSER further, because I think there's a lot of questions that people would have, and I would love to once we go back, look at the feedback of this and try and set up a time again to set up a follow-up session to this. Thank you so much, Dr. Nandini, for agreeing for this.
Thank you very much. My pleasure. And thanks for organizing this, Manan. It's been really useful. And yes, anytime in the future, I'll always be up for it. Thank you.
Thank you. What we'll do is we'll upload this video, like a lot of people have requested. We will upload this video on YouTube as well once I've edited a bit out. And what I'll do is in the description at the bottom of the video, I'll put the links for Dr. Nandini's book from Amazon as well, so that I think it'll be easier to buy. Thank you so much, everyone. I think luckily enough, the viewer count hasn't dropped like we were talking before. Like, it's constantly remained consistent. I've tried to cover as many questions as we can, but thank you so much, and we'll see you around. We'll try and set up a follow-up session to this as soon as possible. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.